I want to talk about what's coming with Iran in this video, because what's coming, I think, is actually going to be some what they euphemistically call these days kinetic action. The Iranians are, let's just face it, they're a pain in the ass. Since 1979, Iran has been, and I'm not just joking here, it's been the original Islamic State. They've always been after our interests. They've done all number of things since 1979. We've had a Cold War with Iran. There's no other way to look at it. And they never stopped what they were doing when they signed the nuclear treaty with Obama. The only difference was they had more money to do it. And in some ways, that just helped them. I mean, that money helped bankroll Assad. Whatever you want to say about Assad in Syria, we helped bankroll him because the Iranians support him up. The Syrians have no economy. They have no money. How have they survived all these years? The Russians don't give them money. They give them military help. They actually sell them equipment for cash. Where are the Syrians getting all the cash to keep going? They get it from Iran. And when we gave money to Iran, they were shipping it right over, parts of it anyway, to Syria. We helped bankroll Assad. So on the one hand, you had the Obama administration complaining about what was going on in Syria. On the other hand, you had them sending the cash to the Iranians to support it. They're also supporting what's going on in Yemen. They're supporting all kinds of the Shia minorities, or in some cases majorities, in some areas of the Gulf Coast. So Oman and the UAE and Bahrain, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia itself. They're causing all kinds of problems there. We got problems with Gaza, with Hamas, which they control, and Hezbollah in Syria and Lebanon. Its home is in Lebanon, but they also operate in Syria. And now they have, just this week, they have Shia militia units in Iraq that are announcing they're going to go after Americans and American interests and try to, eliminate them and kill them. So all these things have been going on. Plus, they started attacking shipping in the Gulf. And if you look at what's been going on, over the last 2 years since Trump's been president, they're really upset that, he pulled out of the treaty, which means, they'll just get their bomb maybe a couple of years faster, although it won't make any difference. But they've gotten hit with these sanctions, which are crippling because their whole economy is heavily subsidized, and it's subsidized from the economy from oil revenue. And if they don't get the economy from the oil revenue, they don't have money for the subsidies. So prices go up, and inflation goes up, business slows down. Is the university-educated class, which they pride themselves in, is often unemployed. So what are they doing? Well, what have been doing? They've been constantly pushing the envelope to see how far they can go and get away with it. And so far, they've gotten away with everything, even when they attacked the tankers and the approaches to the Gulf. And we knew that they did it. I mean, who else? Who else would have done it? Nothing happened. They got away with it. And they got away with it because they know that the countries in the West do not want a war in the Middle East. And they'll just go out of their way to avoid it, just as they went out of their way to avoid war in Europe and Munich. I mean, it's just a question of how far will they go to appease the Iranians. And we really don't know what that limit is. So they're trying to push it as far as they can, hoping to bring additional pressure on the Trump administration by saying, so the Europeans, the Euro weenies will say, oh, if you don't back down, we might have war in the Middle East and we don't want that. So that's basically what they're trying to do. So now they've really gone far. They actually attacked oil sites, part of the oil economy in Saudi Arabia, and knocked it out for a couple of weeks. This is a big deal, especially for the Saudis, who also need to sell their oil for money to subsidize everything in their country. So this is like hitting them with sanctions, at least short-term sanctions in a way. So the question is, if you don't do anything, what's going to happen? Well, they'll do something else. They'll go a little bit further. I mean, if you look going back 2 years and you look at their escalations, each one, they go a little further. So if nothing happens this time, they'll do something even bigger, hoping they get away with it. And that's the way they operate. And we know that they operate that way. As I said, they're the original Islamic State. The other thing you know about the Iranian government, if you've tracked them since 1979, is they lie. They always lie. They were lying about mining the Gulf back in 1987, 1988, until we actually caught them in the act with video and captured their ship. They just lie regularly. They think nothing of lying if it's in the interest of their regime. They've got to be some of the biggest liars on the planet. I mean, they make Putin look like a piker. So something has to happen. Now, why hasn't something happened? I think I know why it hasn't happened, and I don't have any, contacts or any sources or anything like this. But just think about this logically. We know that since the attack on Saudi Arabia, the Iranians have said that they're ready for an all-out war. Now, I think, again, they're lying. I don't think they really want an all-out war. If they wanted an all-out war and they were so eager for it, they could have started one. I mean, it's not like you have to be a rocket scientist to figure out how to start a war in the Middle East. It's got to be one of the easiest things to do on the planet. Excuse me. So if they really wanted one, they would have started one. And since they didn't start one, we can assume that they really don't want one, that they're bluffing. But of course, you want to play it safe. You can't be metaphysically certain that they're bluffing. And of course, the way their regime works between various groups, it's always possible that one group will do one thing and one group will think another and do something else. So you could, even if the people talking really don't want an all-out war, there may be people there who do. So let's assume, just for a second, you're Donald Trump. I know that's hard for you for some of you to do, and you're Mike Pompeo. And let's assume that you feel like we have to answer this time. This time, Iranians are going too far. We have to do something. Now, I'm not talking about, nuking Tehran. I'm not talking about all-out war. We're not talking about invading Iran. We're talking about a retaliatory strike against Iranian oil assets. There are plenty of them, and they're not that hard to get to. They're right on the coast, and it's not like we don't know where they are. We know where they are, and we can get there. So what would you do? You launch a joint, actually it could be a combined U.S.-Saudi strike against some of these assets. And hopefully you could talk other Gulf countries, Gulf cooperation countries into coming along. Possibly Oman, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, who am I forgetting? Anyway, other Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC countries. It would look best if you get more of them in, even though if the U.S. does the major part of the heavy lifting. But you don't want to go in alone. You want to go in, especially with the Saudis. And the Saudis have a fairly large air force that they pumped a lot of money into an air defense system. So you can do that. Now, the problem is, there's two layers here. The first layer is, can you get enough forces in the region to do that? And that's not really hard. The Saudis have a lot of air bases that we can use, and others do too. We've been there before, the first Gulf War. So getting forces there to do the strikes isn't that hard. But the second part, though, is what if the Iranians aren't bluffing? And what if, in retaliation for our retaliation, they go to an all-out war and go after everything in the region? Start throwing ballistic missiles at Israel, do all kinds of things, go after shipping in the Gulf, approaches to the Gulf, start attacking ships with their submarines. And they could do all these things. It's entirely conceivable. So if you're Trump and Mike Pompeo, what you have to do, and the national security establishment as a whole, what you have to do is to be prepared for that. So you don't want to launch a retaliatory strike, which probably won't, but might prompt an all-out Iranian attack, until you're prepared in the region to deal with an all-out Iranian attack, at least defensively. So my guess is that's what's going on right now. And, there's probably, you used to be able to track Central Command forces during the Obama administration. You go online and see where they were and what they were doing. You can't do that anymore. Trump stopped that somebody stopped it when he came in. So I don't know what's going on in Central Command, and I don't know anybody who's there. And the people who are, actually, I do know a couple of people who are kind of up, but they're not saying anything. So, but that doesn't mean nothing's happening. And my guess is, having looked at other things when I worked for the Navy going on, you can move a lot of ships around and move a lot of airplanes around and move a lot of troops around without people knowing. Because they don't have to be, you know, like right in Saudi Arabia. They just have to be in staging distance to these places just in case of events. And there's probably air defense systems being moved around. There might be stuff going on with the Israelis, you know, with everybody else in any of the Gulf cooperation. I mean, if they go all out war, I mean, even the GCC countries that don't get involved in a strike are probably going to be involved. So my guess is all this stuff's going on, and you know, I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't have any sources of intelligence. I don't have any anonymous sources I can quote. I guess if I was working for the New York Times or the Washington Post, I say I have an anonymous source who told me all these things, even though I really don't. But that would be good enough to get into the Washington Post if I had the proper connections with the deep state, I guess. But I don't have any of that. But I know, having watched things evolve when I did have a clearance, and know how when things heat up, things move around, and people don't know they're moving around because they keep it quiet. I know this stuff can happen. For example, back in the 1953, when we had the coup, the horrible coup where we, you know, stamped out Iranian democracy. What you don't know is, if you go back, you know, the Navy was moving all kinds of stuff around, including nuclear forces were moving around. And if that coup had failed, I don't know what was going to come next. But they weren't going to let Iran go down the shithole. Let's put it that way. But you know, nobody in the media knew any of those things were going on. Actually, the histories I've looked at, people don't mention that these things were going on. But when I actually looked at what the Navy was doing and the other services were doing their own things, things were moving, and they were moving into position, and they were getting ready for the possibility of a war in Iran, because the Iranians have a treaty, and it's important to take. It's still understand. The Iranians have like a 1922 or 1923 treaty with Russia, so that if foreign troops come in, the Russians can come in too. So that would be very interesting. That's part of the problem with actually invading Iran is, you know, you could end up in a war with Russia, unless the Russians, you know, pull a Obama like he did with the Ukraine and say, well, yeah, you know, well, we got this treaty, but, you know, that was 1922, you know, it was 1995. We're not going to live up to that. Sorry, you know, you're going to lose Crimea. So it's possible the Russians would do that. I mean, I haven't seen anything from the Russians saying that if you invade Iran, we're moving in under the treaty. They're saying it would be foolish to move in and things like that. So it's like they don't even want to put themselves in a corner. So I don't know that Putin's ready to go to war for Iran. But we'll see. And these are indeed dangerous games. But as I said, if Trump doesn't do anything, the Iranians are going to say, aha, okay, what can we try next? What's the next thing we're going to do? What's our next escalatory step? And I don't, you know, have any knowledge about, you know, what they might think that would work. But they'll do something. And the only thing that's going to get them to stop is to, you know, punch them in the nose. And unfortunately, that's the position that we're in. Either that or fold, let them pump in all the money they want so they can go and fuel, you know, all these revolutionary groups, jihadist groups they support, keep Assad going, and you know, then they'll get their bomb a little later. I mean, why do we worry about them buying a bomb? I mean, the leader of the country, the Ayatollah Khamenei, their supreme leader, you know, it's the translation of basically, if it was German, you call him a Führer. What a great title. Their supreme leader supposedly has issued a fatwa saying that it would be, you know, un-Islamic for the Islamic State to have nuclear weapons. So why are we worried about them getting a bomb in the first place? Why did Obama go to the lengths to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon when their supreme leader has said, at least it's said that he said, nobody's actually seen the damn thing, that it would be un-Islamic to have nuclear weapons? I mean, the whole treaty that Obama signed, or didn't sign, it's not really a treaty, the agreement he reached with the Iranians is based on the supposition that the guy we're cutting the deal with, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is a liar. Because if you think Khamenei is not a liar, then he's never going to produce nuclear weapons, and you don't need the agreement. You only need the agreement if you assume that the guy you're cutting the deal with is a bald-faced liar, and that the regime he leads is a liar regime, which they are. So that was the whole foundation of the Obama deal with Iran, that they were lying to us, that they had been lying all along. Their leaders lie. The whole state is a lying state. And that's why we needed this deal. But what good is a deal with a state that's a lying state? They're not telling you the truth. How do you trust them? And there certainly wasn't, an ability to go in on the ground and check things out there. So the whole thing made no sense. And it still doesn't make sense. And, God bless Trump for pulling out of it. And the fact that the Euro weenies want to try to hang on to it is just, they would hang on to anything. They would sell Czechoslovakia down the river the last time, to get what they wanted, and they do so again. These people have no spine. And they're the people who are in charge in Europe. So we're basically on our own. We'll have the Saudis, maybe some of the other Gulf states. And we'll see what the Iranians do. We hit them back. Did they go to an all-out war? It's not inconceivable. I don't think they'll do it, though. What did they do after that? I don't know. But they are under a lot of pressure. I mean, without their oil revenue, their subsidies, their budgets, like at least the lowest estimate is they've lost 32% of their budget. And imagine if U.S., trying to keep a balanced budget lost 32% of its income. And that's a huge amount. I mean, inflation rate is something approaching 1,000%. Unemployment rate is huge, especially college graduates. It's up, by some counts, close to 40%. Everything's going up because everything's subsidized. And the money that they are bringing in, they still have to bankroll Saddam or Assad in Syria to, tune of a couple billion a year that they could be spending on their own people. But they're not. They're spending it on the Houthis, and they're spending it on Hamas, and they're spending it on Hezbollah. I mean, they bankroll Hezbollah in Syria. It's like one of their private armies. They have their own troops in Syria, their own forces in Syria that Israelis have been hitting for the last couple of months. And they keep doing all these things, even with the little bit of money that they had. So, I mean, pulling the sanctions off and giving them what they want, to me, is not an option. It's just going to cause more problems in the Middle East. You won't have an all-out war. You'll have this smoldering war. And, the Iranians are going to do what they do. As I said, they are the original Islamic State. We have to understand that. And they are the original Islamic lying state. I mean, those are the two fundamental things you have to understand about Iran. They do not tell the truth. And they are basically fundamentally a jihadist state. They want to see Islam, take over the world. Doesn't mean they're planning to do it anytime soon, but that's their goal. It's been their goal. That's what Khomeini, as opposed to Khamenei, was all about. I mean, he was committed to Islamic revolution, spreading Islam around the world. Of course, that means going against the Sunnis as well, and the Saudis are Sunnis. So that's what I think is going to happen. I could be dead wrong. I mean, I've been wrong in the past, but occasionally I get things right too. And I do think, once the administration gets forces in position to deal with the possibility, an unlikely possibility, but a possibility of the Iranians just going wild in the Middle East, when those forces, defensive forces, are in position, that's when we'll see the attack. And it's only then, probably as the attack goes in, that we'll see the intelligence they have on why they think the Iranians did what they did. I mean, when Saddam went into Iraq back in 1990, we had all kinds of intelligence about what was going on in Kuwait. But it wasn't released. It wasn't released until the day, because I mean, I was there. I had a clearance. I was in the Pentagon. I worked in Op 603, and I saw all the intelligence, and it wasn't getting leaked. It wasn't being released. There were people denying reports and stuff like that. It wasn't until it was dated in November, I forget the exact date, 6, 7, something like that. The decision was made to move the troops from Germany, it was 7th Corps, 3rd Corps, whatever it was, Germany to the Arabian Peninsula. And these were the troops that were going to conduct the attack. Once that decision was made, and the troops were literally moving and starting to show up, that's when they released the intelligence they had on what the Iraqis were doing in Kuwait. So, you control information with your military movements. This is how a national security strategy works. So I don't know what they have. They have released a little bit about why they think they were Iranian, why they think they came from Iran, which I always thought they came from Iran. It's the idea of, Houthis, flying with joysticks, drones across the entire Arabian desert and hitting those places. It doesn't work that way. Whatever happened, you come right across, low altitude, across the Persian Gulf, boom, you're there in minutes. Now, whether they were, you picture people here who are a drone, they think of some little thing I can put on my desk. A drone, a Tomahawk cruise missile, you could argue, is a kind of a drone, except it's a suicide drone. It doesn't come back. Whereas, you picture drones dropping little packages and flying back. Even some of the drones we use with Hellfire missiles, they shoot the missiles and then they come back. That's one type of a drone. But a drone is just a remotely piloted or computer-directed vehicle. And with some have little propellers, some have rocket engines, jet engines. Tomahawk cruise missiles have the jet engine. So how you define these things, I don't know. These things were pretty big. They weren't like little desktop drones with little bomb cases that are about this big. These things were big, and they probably came right over the Gulf. And we probably have. I would say probably. I know we have information we're recording all the time. There's all kinds of things on our ships and our aircraft. We have there's AWACS out there. So they're recording. They're not good for looking down at things. They're good for the sky. But we have other things that look up, and especially our ships. And we have a bunch of ships over there. And the Saudis have these things too. And they record as they follow. So they probably have the electronics and all these. They probably know exactly where they came from. They know what their flight attitude was. They probably came in very low, and they know like I said, they probably know exactly where they came from in Iran. But they won't release all that because once they do, the Iranians are going to start lying again and running to the UN and talking about how they're being attacked by the evil orange man. So they won't release those things until the eve of, or possibly the day after, we actually attack. We'll attack, and then we'll put out our evidence, which is actually what I think I would recommend. Don't give them time to run to the Euro-weenies and see if they can get some help. So I think that's what's going to happen. Once everything gets in position, we know where they came from, and those positions are going to get hit. They'll get hit by combined U.S. Gulf Cooperation Council strikes. It may only be the Saudis, but that'll be enough. If the Saudis don't want to do anything, then the hell with them. They're on their own as far as I'm concerned. But I think they do. They know what the game is, how it's played. So I think that's what's going to happen. And it may happen a week from now, 2 weeks, it might be a month, could be 2 months. I really don't know. I don't know how much they feel that they need to move there to cover those kinds of contingencies. But when it happens, you may not get a warning. It may be you wake up in the morning and it's happened that night. It'll probably happen in the dark. It will probably be a night attack. So something like between 10 and 2 their time, which over here would be, right before you wake up in the morning. And then there'll probably be no warning. There'll be nothing on the news. They won't give them time to get their news cycles in and bring out all the never Trumpers who talk about, about Trump. It'll just happen. So you wake up one morning, you'll pick up your phone or you'll turn the TV on, or if you still listen to radio, I don't know, whatever. And that'll be the news that overnight, bingo, they hit certain places in Iran hard. But could be wrong. We'll see. Time will tell.